Hi everyone, welcome back. We're going to take a little brief moment just to discuss pollinator communities, their interactions, and some unique adaptations that exist within pollinator communities that make them more effective mutualists for the plants that they pollinate. So if we recall from the last video, generalization is far more common than specialization, and even highly specialized mutualisms often involve multiple plant visitors, for example, even in fig wasps. So this means that for most of the interactions that we're looking at, most of the mutualisms we're looking at between plants and their pollinators, we can expect multiple pollinators to be visiting those plants and for plants to be therefore visited by multiple pollinators. But unfortunately, most people think of plant pollinator mutualisms, especially just when we think about public media perception on pollinators, they think of just one species, and that is Apis mellifera, the European honeybee. And this one species that is now ubiquitous in the United States is not in fact native. It is a imported species that was brought over some 400, 500 years ago. It's also a very expensive species. It has many different disease risks, and it's really not at risk of extinction, unlike many of the popular perceptions of this species are. In reality, most of the pollinator communities in our systems are extremely diverse and populated by wild pollinating insects. For example, in Wisconsin, we have over 500 other species of bees that exist, in addition to the non-native honeybees that we bring in to pollinate things like cranberries and apples. These are species that range from things like bumblebees to metallic green sweat bees, and even some sort of megachilids like osmia, which are the blue mason bees. If we zoom out to the scale of the entire United States, we're looking at about 4,000 different species of bees, with the primary areas of diversity being in the desert Southwest, where there are some pretty unique plant pollinator mutualisms that occur for many rare desert species that only flower during rare windows of optimal conditions, such as rain. Now, if we looked at the entire planet, we're looking at about 25,000 species of bees. Now, I'm focusing here on bees because they are the classic example of plant pollinator mutualists, and bees are completely dependent on plants. They are obligate feeders on pollen and nectar. In reality, there's far more individual species involved in these plant pollinator mutualisms, from orders like butterflies and moths, beetles, flies, and other things as well. Even things like grasshoppers can be involved in plant pollinator mutualisms. Now, these interactions can be thought of kind of like food webs. The vast majority, in fact, of plant pollinator interactions are embedded within a complex web of plant pollinator interactions. Again, multiple species of bees visiting multiple species of plants. And we can start to test hypotheses about how these different networks are formed and how they're structured based on this kind of concept of a food web of a network like this. We can remove links of these and start to see how networks begin to restructure themselves based on experimental conditions. So briefly, I just want to discuss on two really cool different adaptations that bees utilize to exploit plant pollinator interactions. And first we'll focus on scopa and corbicula, which are these unique pollen-carrying structures that have evolved across pretty much all clades of bees. So they vary in where they're located on the bee's body. On the far left image here, the scopa is on the bottom abdomen, and these are kind of these thick, structured hairs that allow bees to collect pollen onto their body surface to transport it back to their nest. In the case of this solitary bee in the middle, the scopa is all along the hind leg, up the fibia and femur. And in the case of bumblebees, they have a unique structure called a corbicula, which is a flattened piece of exoskeleton on their legs that has these densely bristled hairs that allow them to kind of groom and pack pollen on, almost like little saddlebags, and they carry that back to their nest. Another unique feature, which is privy to a few different clades of bees, is called sonication or buzz pollination. Now, normally this GIF would actually be playing, so you could see it. What we see here, though, is basically a bumblebee that is visiting a flower. It looks like some sort of a solanaceous plant. These are pretty ubiquitous for having this sort of really tightly held pollen within the anthers. And to get it out, you actually have to sonicate the plant. So In the case of, say, greenhouse pollination of tomatoes, bumblebees are a necessity for this because they are capable of sonicating these flowers. And when they sonicate, they vibrate at a precise frequency that dislodges that pollen from the inside of the anther and allows it to just fall out onto the body of the bees. They then groom it on and collect it. Now, because there are so many different interacting members within plant pollinator communities, we do expect and do see competition between these different groups. Famously, we've been focusing recently on the presence of non-native honeybees and how they reduce bumblebee body size in some cases and densities within the field that they're foraging in. Honeybees are these very, very competitively adept species because of their numbers. We bring them into systems in huge numbers to pollinate crops. Far greater numbers, in fact, that you would probably find in any natural system where they're native. And as a result, they tend to go through some form of exploitative competition with native bees and exploit the resources that those bees are using. In the case of English or bumblebees in the United Kingdom, in this top right figure, we see that the body size in terms of the thorax width of bumblebees is lower across systems where bumblebees, or honeybees rather, are present alongside bumblebees. And this is hypothesized to be because honeybees are removing a lot of the resources in these systems necessary for bumblebees to develop larger workers in their colonies. Likewise, in a study system in Scandinavia, the researchers here found that, and this is in the bottom right panel, that when you have honeybees within systems, that you are far less likely to observe bumblebees foraging in the field. Bumblebee densities on plants are far lower. And this interacts with the quality of the landscape, actually, that these bees are in. So when you have heterogeneous landscapes that are composed of far more different patch types, this difference between when honeybees are present and absent is not as exacerbated as it is when landscapes are simple. Say they're only composed of a few different crop types, as you see on the right side of that panel. So that's it for this. The next thing we're going to focus on is specifically on pollinator mutualisms within agriculture and how we actually exploit those systems.